On behalf of Indiana Network for Higher Education Ministries and the Center for Interfaith Cooperation, welcome. We are really pleased to have Jem Jebbia here with us today from the University of Chicago, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I've never been to Indianapolis before. It's been a treat so far, and I'm sad that I can't stay longer, but I'm glad that I made the 3-hour drive from Chicago. It's also really exciting to be talking about interfaith engagement and my work at this time. This seems like a very holy time. So many religious communities are celebrating Passover and Easter and New Year's and the welcoming of spring. And so it seems like a very sacred time for so many different faith communities and a good time to be talking about how we can work together. I will tell you a little bit of my story. I'll tell you how I came to this work, why I'm so passionate about it, and then I'll tell you a little bit about my senior ministry thesis project and how that has culminated and what I plan to do next with that. I'm from Los Angeles, California. I grew up there. I grew up in a community that was very much Asian American. Many Chinese and Japanese Americans lived around in my neighborhood. And so my family is Catholic. My dad is a very devout Catholic, and my family is Sicilian American. So Catholicism has always been a part of our family culture. At the same time, Buddhism has always been part of my life as well. And when I was 9, I joined a Japanese American basketball team. My best friend went to the Catholic elementary school that I attended, and they needed a center for their team. And at that time in my life, I was very tall. Not so much anymore, but I joined the team, and it was a travel team. So we spent quite a bit of time together, me and my teammates, and I was the only non-Japanese American player on the team. But when I was 9, that was sort of an interesting thing to negotiate. I felt like in many ways, even though I may have looked different than my teammates, we played the same sport, and we ate the same snacks, and we went to sleepovers together where we didn't sleep at all, and we talked about the same activities and problems that we were having at school, which I don't know what was going on in 3rd grade that was so stressful, so I very much felt like I was a part of this community, but at the same time had to negotiate what it meant to be different in some ways. When I was 17, I was attending a boarding school for high school, and I decided that because Japan and Japanese culture had always been such a big part of who I was and how I grew up, I was going to spend a year studying in Japan, in the middle of Tokyo. And I had known about Buddhism and Buddhist culture for quite some time, especially in a Japanese perspective. And going to school in the center of Tokyo meant that I had to get up very early in the morning, every morning, and take the train to school. Every day on the way to and from school, I passed through Shinjuku Station. And Shinjuku, as some of us might know, is sort of like a Times Square of Japan. It's loud, and there's noise and color and pictures and advertisements, and there's just so much going on. Over 1 million people pass through the Shinjuku train station every single day. One day I was coming home from school a little bit early. Basketball practice had ended a little bit early, and so I decided I wanted to go explore Shinjuku and maybe do some shopping. So I exited the station, and everything you can imagine was coming at me. There were lights and advertisements and people everywhere and smells and sounds and just everything to tickle all of your senses. And as I walked just down the street a little bit, I happened upon a Buddhist temple, and I was struck by the difference that I felt as soon as I entered the grounds of this temple. It was like stepping into another world. It was like all of a sudden there was this transformation from absolute chaos to complete serenity and peace. The respect that I felt upon entering this place, that everybody held this place to be so sacred, really stuck with me. And I knew that for the rest of my life I had to explore what it meant to be part of a sacred community. And so now, engaged Buddhism is my practice, and what that means is that I marry my activism, my interfaith activism, with my faith. The story of the Buddha is, I think, one of spiritual transformation by engaging with difference. So the story goes that the young Buddha was a prince in Southeast Asia, in Nepal. And he grew up very, very comfortable. He wasn't hungry. He wasn't sick. He wasn't experiencing poverty like so many of us in the world are. But one day, he caught a glimpse of a sick man. And immediately, the Buddha questioned, why is this person's experience so different than my own? And he began to question more and more what it meant to have different experiences. And again, the Buddha then glimpsed an old man, a man that was aging, and asked the same question, why is this person's experience different? Why is this person suffering and I'm not feeling that same emotion or feeling? And finally, the Buddha caught a glimpse of a man that had died, and this really rocked his world, and he wondered, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to be a human being who suffers in this world that is impermanent and constantly changing? When I was an undergraduate at the University of Southern California, I studied religion, and I was so immersed in the culture of Los Angeles. Los Angeles is one of the most religiously diverse cities in the world, and within walking distance of our campus, there were over 60 houses of worship and congregations and sacred places. So I really wanted to be a part of all of that. But the moment that I knew interfaith work was important and was going to be a part of my life was Thanksgiving in 2008. I remember sitting at the Thanksgiving table. All of the usual suspects were in their places. My extended family was sitting on the couch around the TV. My mom was clearing dishes, and my father was sort of haphazardly placing them in the dishwasher, wanting to get to the TV to watch whatever sporting event was on. And all of a sudden, someone flipped the channel to CNN, and there were bombs and violence on the television. And I looked at the scroll, and it said, terrorist attack in Mumbai. Now, the University of Southern California has the highest population of any college or university of South Asian students anywhere in the United States. And so my thoughts immediately went to these students, to many of the students that I knew that were fellow students at USC. And I thought, this is going to affect our community. When I came back from Thanksgiving break, the Office of Religious Life hosted an interfaith vigil for so many students and staff members and faculty that had been affected by this. It was a beautiful vigil. Many, many people came and gathered in our church, our university church. It was an interfaith space. There were candles lit all around the space. The Office of Religious Life staff spoke. Dean Varun Soni, who is an unordained Hindu attorney, one of the first non-ordained, non-Christian people in this kind of position anywhere in the country. He said some beautiful words. He invited the community to share in silence and grief and hope for the future. Our Associate Dean of Religious Life, Jim Burklow, who's a UCC minister and a progressive Christian, read some wonderful, beautiful passages from the Bible and other sacred texts. Everything went well, despite the sort of vague tension that you could feel in the room. And at the end of the ceremony, we were asked to take a candle outside and to put it in a fountain to symbolize having a little bit of light in a time of great darkness. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I was sitting about halfway back in the church, some students rushed to the front of the room, and I saw Dean Soni very quickly stop them and talk to them, and the students were visibly upset. I wondered at first, why did Dean Soni stop them? Clearly these students were affected and they were upset, and perhaps they needed to say something to the community. I learned later that these students were Hindu students, and they wanted to say words of hate about Islam and about the Pakistani students in the room, that they were inherently violent and that they didn't belong here, and that they had been responsible for this horrible tragedy that had happened. At that moment, I realized two things. I realized that even when we share a community, like a college campus, we have differences, and sometimes these differences can be irreconcilable. Our worldviews can clash. And the other thing I realized is diversity is a wonderful thing. However, if we don't attend to diversity, if we don't take time to name the fact that we have differences that sometimes can be fundamental or irreconcilable, we're opening the floodgates for hate and misunderstanding. I know also that through interfaith engagement, there is hope for us to be able to work together across our differences, and that in fact, doing this can enrich us even further than if we were to work together with those who are like us. At USC, I joined the Interfaith Council for a year, and I was so taken with interfaith dialogue and engagement that I decided to take a year off from my studies and spend a year traveling the world doing interfaith advocacy work around the UN Millennium Development Goals, 8 goals that seek to end global poverty. Part of my training for this fellowship that I did meant that I had to spend time in Malawi, which is a country in Southeast Africa, studying malaria and infectious diseases and how faith communities were coming together to combat this disease and also to work together to end violence in their communities. I was so in awe of these faith leaders that had come together. They had written a declaration for political leaders to follow so that there wouldn't be violence around elections, and this worked. Up until just recently, there hadn't been any violence around election time in this district in Malawi, and that was a big deal. One day, my group, there were 10 fellows and me. We were all from different faith traditions. We were from the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom, and we were all interested in various types of interfaith work or working to eradicate global poverty, and so we had come together on this fellowship, and we were studying together. We crammed in our bus that was by no means big enough for all of us, and we drove down the road. We were in the Mangochi district of Malawi, which is a district in central Malawi on the lake of Malawi. And we drove into the parking lot of a hospital. I noticed two things as I stepped out of the bus. One, that the dust was already in my face and it was in my skin and it was everywhere. It was a dry, warm day and the sun was already beating down on us at about 7 a.m. The second thing I noticed was the long line of women and small children wrapped around the hospital. It sort of looked like the line in front of the DMV. I took note of this line and I wondered, what are all these people waiting for? There are no lines at hospitals where I'm from, at least not outside. We entered the hospital and our guide took us to a room where there were some patients off to the side, and he started explaining some of the treatment that they gave for malaria and some of the medicine that they offered, and he explained that this hospital was special. This was one of the best hospitals in the area because they actually had 3 doctors at this hospital, 3. Some hospitals in this country had no doctors. There were less than 250 doctors in the entire country of Malawi, a country of over 7 million people. And as he started to go through some of the treatment and some of the ways that they served patients, I looked off to the side and I realized that there was a woman cradling her young baby, and the baby was so pale. At one point, our guide gestured to the woman and her baby. This woman was probably my age at the time, 21 or 22. And our guide said, "This baby has malaria, and he will probably die. He's so anemic that he'll be very prone to many other diseases, and even the common colds could kill this baby." I paused for a second and was in my own world, and I looked at this woman and she looked back at me. And I realized that we didn't speak the same language. I didn't know her name. I didn't know her son's name. I didn't know anything about her, except that when I looked into her eyes, I knew that the same fear and care that were in her eyes were in my mother's eyes when she looked at me for the first time. I asked my mother a few years ago, what was it like to hold me in your arms for the first time? I was a premature baby. I was about 3 pounds, and I was told that I wasn't very attractive as a young baby. Hopefully that's changed. My mom said to me something that I didn't expect. She said, "I looked at you and I was terrified. I expected to hear, oh, I was so happy. You know, you made my life. This was the best day of my life." She said, "No, in some ways, this was the worst day of my life, because I knew that from this day on, I was responsible for you. I was responsible for your health, both physical and mental. I was responsible for making you a good person, and that seemed so hard." And so even across the world and across languages and cultures and religions and contexts, I knew that despite the fact that we have fundamental differences, we can also have shared common values. I've been doing interfaith work for about 8 years now. I'm in my 3rd year in the Master of Divinity program at the University of Chicago, and I've come to see many different campuses doing interfaith work. And I've come to realize something crucial about interfaith engagement. On many college campuses up until today, we've seen interfaith work as a way to learn about different religious and spiritual traditions and to engage across differences, but really to focus on our shared values and to learn a little bit of religious literacy. A typical dialogue topic for an interfaith council might be holidays and our traditions, and so we might learn a little bit about Passover from a Jewish student, and Eid from a Muslim student, and Vesak from a Buddhist student. But that actually, if we name our differences, we acknowledge them, and we reflect on them, interfaith engagement can go much deeper than surface-level religious literacy. Interfaith engagement, I believe, can actually offer a type of education that is largely missing from the state of higher education today.